Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, How GitLab Does Product Management. The webinar will consist of a pre-recorded video and a panel of GitLab team members answering your questions live via the Q&A chat section. A recorded version of the webinar will be available after the presentation. Now let's go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. I'm Carlos Bazan. I'm a technical account manager at GitLab.
And I'm Gabe Weaver, the Senior Product Manager for one of the groups within the GitLab Plan stage.
By the end of this session, you will learn how GitLab does product management as an all-remote company and how you can incorporate some of our practices for your own teams. This is going to be a high-level discussion, a one-on-one, if you will, and we encourage you to ask questions and provide feedback on where you want clarity. We will review how GitLab teams are organized, our product development flow, planning our monthly releases, collaborating on delivery plans, and a bonus item of how you can automate parts of the issue management process in the end. To start, how the GitLab teams are organized. And so to understand how GitLab has divided the product work, it's essential to know our mission and strategy. At a high level, GitLab believes everyone can contribute. We're building open source software to enable this contribution, and our goal is to be the leading complete DevOps platform within a single application. So the way that we've organized our product teams is around the DevOps software delivery lifecycle, which you see here. The hierarchy begins at the top with sections, which is going to be our dev, our sec, and our ops sections. Within each section, we further classify by stages. For example, within the development stage is the plan, create, verify, and package stage. And then we further classify within these stages by groups. So for example, Gabe's group is Gabe's stage is the plan stage. And within that stage is the project management group, the product planning group, as well as the certified group. Now, Gabe, you manage that plan stage. Does that mean you're the product manager for each of the groups within that stage as well?
Not at all. There are 3 distinct product teams within Plan, each with their own product manager and engineers and designer. Each team owns several different categories, which represent high-level capabilities that may be standalone products at another company.
Okay, that makes sense. In your experience, what are the benefits of this hierarchy model for breaking up the product work?
The structure of the hierarchy ensures clear ownership. Every feature has a directly responsible individual, which is the product manager for that feature's category. It creates strong alignment with the market and the customers. It also creates alignment with our internal development teams and helps with the issue hygiene process at scale about who owns what and who's responsible for moving certain issues forward.
Got it. And how does this hierarchy transition into how groups, subgroups, and projects are structured within the GitLab software?
I think every organization is unique and has different constraints. We use scope labels to denote the hierarchy, as most of the product teams work out of a single repository because GitLab is a monorepo, a monolithic Ruby on Rails application for the most part. We also use groups and subgroups for notifications only. So we could take our hierarchy and break it up into groups and subgroups so that we can easily notify different teams with a single app mention within the product.
Got it. So what do you recommend for product teams new to GitLab in which, let's say, their engineering teams already have a group and project structure in place, and the product group wants to then move into and use GitLab?
I generally recommend that organizations do what they can to restructure their groups and projects around their various value streams, as that enables seamless reporting from the lower level product teams all the way to the executive roadmap view. This is a basic behavior of groups and projects. So if you are able to reorganize, I would suggest doing that. And if you're not, there are a couple workarounds like sharing groups into other groups for kind of permissions access. And then we're also working on doing a better job of allowing work to roll across different hierarchies. But reorganization would be my first suggestion.
Thanks for that. Now that we know how the product teams are structured, let's go over GitLab's product development flow. So this image illustrates the build process for our teams. GitLab follows this defined and repeatable flow. We have two tracks here, the validation track and the build track. At the start of the validation track, we collect ideas into a backlog via issues. The backlog acts as a single source of truth for stakeholders to engage with the product group. And for this reason, the issue description, the discussion, as well as the metadata within that issue are vital pieces to keep stakeholders up to date. We move then into problem validation to understand the problem. We want to make sure that we're providing the right solutions whenever we do deliver them. So the team validates the problem through in-depth interviews with potential users, user journey mapping, among other forms of validation. And if the problem is minor enough and well understood, for example, let's say a bug, it may be possible to move quickly through this phase by documenting the known data about the problem. Afterwards, we move into the design phase, where we begin to ideate on solutions. After the product and engineering teams have converged on a proposed solution, the issue moves into the final stage within the validation track, which is the solution validation. In this stage, we want to ensure that the idea that we have ideated on is going to actually provide value for our customers. So we do some more interviews with our customers to make sure that we're capturing everything and not missing anything as far as that solution that we ideated on. Do note that the validation track runs in parallel to the build track. So we work to have, our product team works to have at least 2 months of well-validated solutions. So that way the build track and our engineering team always has a well-validated opportunities ready to start building on. So going into the build track, this is where we develop and deliver value to our users through minimum viable changes. First in the build phase is plan. This phase prepares features so they are ready to be built by engineering. So following the final stage within the validation track, the feature should already be broken down into the quickest change possible and be ready for a more detailed review by engineering. And during this phase, product managers are able to prioritize issues for a milestone. So Gabe, during this build planning, how are you typically communicating with the engineering teams?
I personally make extensive use of the to-dos feature in GitLab. I can mention anyone on my team and it'll create a to-do notification for them to respond asynchronously. Similarly, when someone on my team needs my input, they simply mention me in a comment and I'll have a to-do waiting for me to follow up when I'm available. We also hold synchronous planning meetings once a week to touch base on the more complicated topics that are better suited for face-to-face communication.
Got it. The next phase is development and test. And the development and test phase is where we build the features, address any bugs, technical debt, and test those solutions before launching them. So the engineering manager will assign an issue to an engineer who is going to be responsible for building the feature. An engineer can also self-service and pick the next priority order issue from the ready for development queue. When the work is done, we merge the changes into production and close out the issue. Lastly, we track usage and product performance. So after the changes are delivered, we can capture feedback quickly and learn for the next step in the iteration. Gabe, can you show us how you typically manage a release cycle?
I would love to. I think now that you have a high level understanding of our product development flow, let's talk about how we manage that process in GitLab. While we continuously deliver improvements to GitLab.com, our planning cadence centers around our monthly release to our self-managed customers. And we've shipped a new release to GitLab on the 22nd of every month for the past 119 consecutive months. I put together a small demo so that I don't have to dirty our actual issues and epics that we use to manage our product, so that I can illustrate various tasks I do each month without worrying about that. So in this example, I've set it up according to value streams. As I mentioned earlier, we have an Awesome Co. Within Awesome Co, we have a consumer products division, and we have a services division. Within the consumer products, there's a mobile app, there's a web app, and then within the services division, there's the API, there's a customer portal. And then I've also created a couple, an ops project to manage some of the templates and triage process, which we'll touch on later, and a retrospectives group, which is issues only to hold company-wide retrospectives. I've also set up some basic labels to help us track work as it goes through each stage of the product development flow. It also helps us categorize issues by the type of work they represent. So we have different tracks for our build track and validate track. We have different types. We're using scope labels here, which are mutually exclusive key value pairs on an issue to denote the issue type. And then we also have a scope label set to represent our overall workflow through our product development flow.
Yeah, issues are essential at GitLab. A lot of my customers are using issues to be able to show which labels to show which issues are on hold, which are high priority, even which issues that they're working on that are funded versus not funded. So a lot of use cases there for labels.
Exactly. At GitLab, we use milestones to act as a release planning time box, and our iterations as shorter term time boxes. So our releases run for a month and our iterations typically are 2 weeks. So within a given release, we have 2 iterations, and this helps us take high level kind of themes and break them down into smaller deliverable units during each iteration.
Okay, so let me repeat that because I get this question a lot with my customers. So iterations are similar to a sprint. And milestones are going to be for more long-running time boxes. Is that correct?
That is correct. Milestones also have the additional feature of being able to associate Git tags to them to generate automated release evidence. So they're well suited for release planning, whereas your iterations are more for your continuous planning cadence that you do on a smaller scale.
Okay, and so how are iterations and milestones incorporated into our monthly releases?
So what we do is we assign every issue into a release or into a milestone as well as an iteration. Where it sort of starts though is at the epic level. And here I've created an example epic representing the 1.0 launch of the web app and the mobile app for Awesome Co. I typically organize my roadmap into these sort of different high-level themes that my team will need to work on the upcoming releases. Epics are great because they can be nested up to 7 levels deep. So you can break something down all the way from like a strategic initiative down to a user story. The epic view is also helpful for easily organizing sub-epics and issues into different themes. From within the epic view, you can create new issues, you can add existing issues, you can create new epics, you can add existing epics, and you can also drag and drop these around to change the parenting and the order. So you can easily build out a whole business scope worth of release within a single epic view if you need to. We also can see down here in terms of what teams are going to be working on. There's some infrastructure and infrastructure epic for the services team. There's a mobile app interface 1.0 for the mobile app team. There's a web app interface for the web app team. And then there's some issues for the API support needed in order to power the web and mobile apps. And all these have been from this one view created into these different subgroups and projects, so that they're right where the teams are already working, but also roll up into this kind of higher level view that cuts across all of your subgroups. See, now that we can kind of understand how we have our epic setup and issues created, we can use boards to visualize our lifecycle. There are several different board configurations that I leverage throughout a given release cycle, and I've created a board to represent our validation track. Not every issue has to go through every stage, but we generally have a rule that all of them stop at planning breakdown in order for final input from engineering on the implementation details. And then once issues have been weighted, we mark them as ready. So in this board, I have an initial drop lane for issues that need to be triaged. I'm also grouping by epic, so I can see things that are part of themes that I have already defined and where they are in their life cycle. And so I have a validation backlog for the settings discovery for the mobile app. There's an issue and problem validation for the user settings. And then I also have, when I'm ready and these kind of move forward, I just need to drag them and drop them in different stages. And then as they are ready for engineering to look at, We'll put them in a planning breakdown, and then we kind of go through process asynchronously where we wait the issues. The engineers will do that, and then as soon as they do, we can move it into ready. So that's sort of how we move work through the validation board, and also see that work mapped to the themes or the parent epics that they belong to. I think once you have things that are kind of, and this is like Carlos said earlier, this is running parallel to our build track. When things are in ready, we can go over to what I use as a milestone board. And this is where I have my different releases, which are the milestones that I kind of showed earlier. I've created a list for each of those. And then what I can do here is if I need to go in and filter things that haven't been scheduled yet, we can kind of see, like I generally, if this is in problem validation, it's not ready yet. So what I do is I filter this by label, and I'll go workflow is ready. And that will enable me to see all the issues across all the epics or parent themes that are ready, and I can sequence that work out across different releases. So that's the high level release plan that I typically do once a month. And then when it comes down to iteration planning, I also have an iteration board. And this board lets me have my different iterations that are in the future as lists as well. And so you can create different kinds of lists. You can create label lists, assigning lists, you can create iteration and milestone lists, and they're all good for different use cases. And so when I'm going in to try and sequence some of this work out across upcoming iterations, I can see how much weight is in each iteration based on my team's velocity, and I can kind of calculate if my team usually gets around 10 done. I probably have too many here, and I might want to move this out into the next one. This is still overweighted, so I might move this out into the next one a little bit, and kind of try to shift some of these until we kind of balance out what our weight should be. And again, the group by epic is a great feature to use here because you can kind of see everything in context of the parent epic that it belongs to. So you can kind of make trade-offs across your different themes when you're doing your kind of iteration planning into the future. And then for the current iteration, I have a board that is scoped to the current iteration. In the edit board settings, we can see it's scoped to the current iteration. And I have my workflow labels that are part of the build track. So I can see things that are marked as ready. I can, whenever an engineer wants to pick them up, they'll just grab it. They will assign themselves. They'll drag it into progress. When they're done, they'll drag it into review. Once the merge request has been merged, it usually gets pushed up to Canary for production. We verify the behavior there. We make sure that all the tests are passing, all the acceptance tests, the end-to-end tests. And then once it's been verified, we move it into closed. And then the issue is done because it is on production in our customers' hands.
Lots of boards, so it sounds like it helps a lot with just getting a high-level overview of where project stands. How do you know what your teams are working on at a given time? Do you do any daily stand-ups for this?
Yeah, we use Geekbot and Slack for daily asynchronous stand-ups. I also use, and I can show you right quick, a team board similar to this, but has everyone from my team on it. With lists for each assignee on my team. With these boards, I can get a nice view and context switch, or just switch between context during the release cycle, whether I want to see what my team is working on, what each person is working on, if we're on what is happening in our current iteration. If I need to do a little bit longer term planning across different iterations, I can do that. If I need to think about my monthly release planning, I go to that board to do it. So I've kind of created a board for each specific task that I need to do throughout the month.
Thank you.
I think now that you can see how we planned out a few of our upcoming releases and iterations, let's take a look at our roadmap. So when you assign issues to milestones and to iterations, and then you estimate your issues, you're able to view your epics within a roadmap view. That has the timeline for when the epic and all of its children have been scheduled out into the future. So you can see here, I've kind of broken up the V 1.0 launch across release 1 and release 2 milestones. And you get an overall progress counter of how much weight you completed versus how much is outstanding. And from this view, you can also drill down into the sub-epics and kind of see individual progress reporting for each of those sub-themes, which is a great way to communicate progress to stakeholders, especially those that don't want to get in the weeds of boards and all that other stuff. They can quickly go to this roadmap view and they can drill down and they can see exactly what's on track and what's not. And I think, lastly, I'd love to explore some other helpful aspects for using GitLab to manage and track your work. One of the things that we use extensively at GitLab is templates. and they allow you to sort of like effortlessly predefine markdown templates, quick actions for when creating or editing an issue. So for example, these are GitLab's actual issue templates. We have one for acceptance testing. We have one for audit event proposal. We have a bug template. We have one for facilitating design sprints, for improving documentation, for running experiments during the validation process, for managing feature flags, for example, all the way down to problem validation. So for each of these different steps, we have templates that represent them, and they sort of outline the different steps and the different things that we need to do. So in this problem validation template, for example, what we're looking at right here is a rice scoring that we built in this template. So product managers that are going through can easily do the rice scoring and see what the scales are and calculate that within the issue without having to go look anywhere else. So it's great for quickly managing and creating some standard formats for your different types of issues and different processes you have. I think one of the biggest bottlenecks, like or challenges any software team has, or any manager of a software development lifecycle, is understanding where your bottlenecks are. For this, I use our value stream analytics report, which I've customized to our product development flow. So this is from our actual GitLab team, that in all of the issues, we use a similar workflow that I've just described in the demo, where we have validation backlog, problem validation design, and so on and so forth. And so what I'm able to see here is an overall overview of our lead time from when issues created to close is 14.4 days. Our cycle time from when a merge request gets associated to an issue to when the issue gets closed is 0.7 days. You can see during this time period of April 23rd through May 22nd, we've had 7,131 new issues open, and we've deployed about 6 to 10 a day across our different environments. And what I can do within this view as well is quickly go through these different steps of my process and identify which one is the slowest. So from just quickly looking at this, solution validation is naturally going to take a little bit longer, and because it's not part of, our delivery work stream necessarily, or like what's going to go into a specific release. I care the most about things that are in the build track. And so right here we have planning breakdown, which across the 52 items that went through this stage recently, the median time was about 3 days. Ready for development was about 5 days. So when I look at this, I kind of want to jump down into this and understand what are some of the things in this that maybe took a long time and why. And so I can kind of see each of the issues that passed through the stage. I can drill down and I can click on it and I can look into this issue if I want to, communicate with the engineers that were on it and ask them what some of the challenges were. And it sort of is a really helpful gauge to understand where your slowest process is in your workflow. And as long as you set up your labels correctly, or however you want to customize your labels, you can customize your value stream report to map any sort of workflow process that you want to build into GitLab.
Okay, but how are you actually tracking the build initiative's overall health? For example, if the build initiative is on track or doesn't need attention?
So one of the things I regularly do is check the iteration or milestone burn up or burn down charts. So for example, here is from our demo, the current iteration that's happening, where we have some issues assigned to it. I can see the things that are open. I can see the things that are in progress, who's assigned to them. And then I also have a burn down chart, which shows me, are we burning down along the grid line? Clearly we're not. This is a demo, but it's helpful for understanding, are we burning down effectively? But equally important is understanding how much is our scope change during the iteration, right? So the more scope you add, it's not going to necessarily move this burn down line. So you could be completing issues while also adding new ones to the iteration. And so the burn chart is helpful for understanding, are we adding new scope? And so as you can see, the iteration started, we had 1 issue. Over the course of the iteration, we went all the way up to 6 issues, and then we removed some scope down to 4 issues. We've only completed 1. So these same charts are available on the milestone report view, and then you can kind of get some high-level views up here. You can also toggle, if you prefer, between issues and issue count and issue weight, so you can see progress in those 2 different dimensions. The other thing that I do quite often is, let me go find that epic I was at. As you can see, these indicators right here are health status that can be set on individual issues. Those health statuses roll up in aggregate from all the child issues and to sub epics into the parent epic. So at a very high level, you can see right here, I have 2 issues on track. I have 1 at risk. I have 1 that needs attention. From these counts, I can see exactly where the one that needs attention is. You can see down here, it's right there. I can pop this open, and then I can see which issues are at risk. And this is a great opportunity for me to dive in and see how I can support getting this unblocked and moving it forward.
Well, could you also show, so in the last step of the build cycle, we mentioned that we we track for performance and adoption of that new feature. Can you show us how GitLab does this for our new features that we release?
Yeah, it's a little bit different than traditional companies, I would think. We value our customers' privacy a whole lot, and we don't use any third-party tracking tools or software. And so we don't do event collection like typical product teams or product organizations might. Instead, we use something called a usage ping, which has database counters together and anonymized counts, basically the frequency and the uniqueness of who like interactions with features. So for example, I can show you this is mine when we implement a new feature, saying we want to see how many people create an issue. I have no idea who they are because it's literally just an integer, but it does show us the total count across all of our instances that are have created an issue in May, for example. I've been working on iterations and making that a better feature. So since I launched it in September, we're kind of tracking upwards and we can start to see adoption of the feature over time. All of these individual metrics roll up into a parent metric, which is our monthly active users, or MAU, which is the performance indicator for most of our product teams. And that performance indicator is publicly available, like on our handbook, where we have pages, and then once a month we do reviews with the product leadership and across the product organization to talk about these and talk about things we're doing to improve them, or if things are on track or not. We record basically the overall health for it, and we kind of talk about other things like maybe what lessons we've learned from launching new feature and from looking at the data, or what our focus is for the upcoming month. And so this is how within our company we align all the individual product teams around having performance indicators that all roll up into sort of like the key performance indicator for the product organization.
Okay, so since it sounds like our process is fairly unique to our own, what would you recommend for customers that may already have a tracking system in place to see how releases or software changes are performing?
I think as long as you define what success looks like for each thing you're shipping or how you're going to measure it, it doesn't really matter what tool you use to track usage. There's dozens of them out there. Every company uses a different one. Everyone has different preferences. But as long as when you're going through the validation process, clearly defining what success looks like how are you going to measure it? And that's something that we do during the validation process, is we define how we're going to measure it. So that way we know when we go into the build track and we release it and we implement whatever usage counts that we need to implement, and we start collecting that data, we can then reflect back and tie it back to a specific issue or epic or theme that we delivered, and seeing if that had the outcomes that we had anticipated. And if not, we learn from it, which is very often the case. So it's not bad if it doesn't have the exact outcomes that you want, so long as you take the time to look at the data and learn from it to make better decisions next time.
Thanks. Any other final notes before we move on to this bonus item?
I think that's it. That was a quick overview of how we use GitLab to build GitLab. I think I'm going to hand it over to you to finish up the webinar with high-level summary of GitLab triage.
Yeah, so let's so anytime that you're managing issues and labels to manage your day-to-day work, defining a specific process, it can be difficult to keep these labels in the correct stack. So the solution that GitLab has come out with is the GitLab triage bot, which is an open source project that makes it possible to automate the hygiene tasks on issues and merge requests. Some use cases that GitLab uses the triage bot for is to automatically assign labels, assign users, rescheduling milestones, identifying interesting feature proposals, and much more. So Gabe, I think you have an example, real world example of how we're using the triage bot.
I do. I'd love to share that. So if you remember sort of like the workflow we set up where we had different workflow labels, what I've done is I created a triage policies YAML file in my ops project that I kind of talked about earlier. And I've just created two simple roles here. The first would be marking estimated issues as ready for development. So not all issues have to go through the validation track. Sometimes when we're triaging, an engineer might go ahead and wait an issue that is small that doesn't need to be validated, like a bug fix or something else. And so what this will do is we'll look across anything that it has a more or less like a workflow validation track label that's open, that has a wait, and it will go ahead and automatically apply the ready label to that. So it's a great way to, even if you're doing planning breakdown and you wait an issue, you don't have to manually move it. It will take everything and we'll put everything into ready for scheduling that has a wait on it. It's just a small example. The next one would be marking new issues for triage. So if an issue is open and it doesn't have any of our workflow labels on it, let's say it's opened by a stakeholder who doesn't know what our label system is, or they're not sure what label they're supposed to apply when. What this one does is says, like, any label that doesn't have one of these workflow labels, we're going to go ahead and mention me. You can mention any user who's a member of the project or the group. I'm going to mention, it's going to mention me, and it's going to automatically apply the workflow triage label. So when you go back to like kind of looking at your boards, we have a list in here for triage, and we'll go ahead and pop that issue into this. So when I'm looking at this board, I can quickly triage things, especially like things that are not part of an epic that I'm kind of working on or that I plan for. I can easily see that new issue and I can put it into a different step, whether I need to put it directly into the build track or I need to put it into the validation backlog and kind of work on prioritizing that for an upcoming kind of work for the designer or the engineering lead. So it's a quick example of how you can use GitLab Triage. This is super flexible. It can work on epics, it can work with issues, it can work with merge requests, and it's also very, very extensible. So.
And if you're interested in learning more about it, I highly recommend, since this bot is completely open source available to you, highly recommend taking a look at this article from our strategic marketing team titled Issue Automation, Keeping Your Issues Squeaky Clean. This is going to give you some more overview, as well as some other examples that you can do and how to actually set up the triage bot for yourself. So definitely recommend taking a look at this article, and that way you can get help in getting that set up for utilization with your own teams. That concludes our series on product management at GitLab. Please let us know what questions you have, what feedback you have for us, and what you'd like to see next. Take care.
Well, everyone, thanks for joining. We will now be taking questions live. We've been answering some of your questions live during the Q&A or in the Q&A section. If you have any questions, other questions, please raise your hand in the webinar and we can select you to answer some questions live. Hey, GC.
Hi, guys. Great webinar. I'm new to the company, so if I'm asking really kind of silly newbie questions, please forgive me. But here goes. What type of training effort or learning effort will launch, or is there such a thing happening, thought about? That's basically it.
Is that, just to clarify, is that learning efforts particularly around the project management features that are around GitLab? Or can you clarify?
The ones that you guys just covered today, yeah.
So we will be providing the video after after the webinar. We'll be compiling the Q&A. I guess, what else were you referring to?
Maybe something just a bit more holistic in terms of instructional materials, maybe some exercises for people that are new to GitLab, also new to project management, and then new to GitLab plus project management. Things that people will get connected to during the training program to this new feature. So people don't forget it, and they really want to use it.
I think it's a great idea. We can I can get back with the team and we can discuss what we can do, what we can put together, possibly what's been done at other places, and see what we can put together. But I think that's great feedback.
Cool. Thank you for the question. Thank you for letting me ask the question.
Yeah, appreciate it, JC.
Carlos, you want to give a plug for our Learn website
Yeah, there's we do have a GitLab, learn.gitlab.com. I believe that's what it is.
Hmm.
So let me share my screen real quick.
Get the correct link added, but yeah, we'll promote that. And then also, I think we do offer paid professional services training. So if your organization needs training in this, reach out to your account manager or technical account manager, and they can give you an overview of those options. We do that so that we can customize the training to your particular agile workflow, so that we can teach how to do it in your organization. There's also potentially GitLab University and yeah, the GitLab Learn site. That's probably the best place for training, free training today.
Cool.
Yes, I'm sharing within the GitLab Learn, we have specifically to agile project management. We have various areas. Let me scroll down to that area. Various videos and various trainings that it sounds like a lot what you're describing, just a little further details and further training. And of course, we want to hear your feedback to understand if there's something within these videos that you're not finding, something you want additional training on. We do plan on continuing these webinars, and we want to hear from the audience of what is it that they're interested in learning more about. All right, Ilko.
Yes, hello. Thank you guys for the nice presentation. Question I have, having some bad experiences in the past with tools like Jira, etc., where you can configure everything, but if you do it wrong and start working with it and want to adjust stuff later on, you wind up having a hard time. How difficult or easy is it to do with GitLab to play around a bit with configuring your particular processes and maybe wanting to alter a bit later on?
Gabe, do you want to answer that one?
Sure. I can take it. It's fairly painless. I mean, you can move groups and projects around. You can. There's really not much configuration required that other than figuring out your label hierarchy. And so like it's pretty flexible, I think, at least. So yeah, it's not really anything like Jira from that level of configuration. You just don't need to do it for the plan side. There's a little bit more you might want to think through in terms of how you set up your repos and your pipelines and kind of that side of the product. But in terms of playing around with things, most everything is a two-way door. So.
And quick follow-up. Thank you for that, by the way. Would you recommend getting some experienced help with setting it up the first time, or is general experience enough to start, playing around and figuring out what works for us?
I think if you have general experience, you'll be fine. If you have a little bit of technical experience, it will help with the repository and the CI/CD and that kind of side of the product as well. But it's fairly, we have really good documentation. Always could be better, but it pretty much can answer most of what you need in terms of figuring out how to use GitLab. So I would check that out and play around with it. If you can't figure it out on your own, then we're not doing a good job building an intuitive product. So we'd love that feedback as well.
And I think I always encourage people to just study the different capabilities within the plan stage, the labels, the milestones, figure out how they work, and just iterate to get there. It's going to be a journey. You're not going to set everything up perfectly the first time, but it is very flexible as you add new workflows, new templates, things like that. You can build up what you need over time.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions from the, yes, we do. Kevin, if you want to vocalize your question,
Yeah, can you hear me all right?
we can.
Great. So we've been using GitLab for a few years at the company I'm at, and we're really trying to hone in our process more. And a lot of that deals with Agile, which I just saw in the learning section. You had some videos on that, which I'll review afterwards. But I wanted to get into when you're using the Agile methodology, are you and you're creating issues? One, are you typically doing 2-week sprints for these? And then each issue, do you break them down into like different points? And are they, what is that system that you use for that? Because we were reviewing kind of different ways that we were doing that internally. And I wanted to see what you thought your best practice was on that.
Yeah, I can take that. There's some teams that are using iterations in GitLab. There's other teams that are using more of a pull-based system with Kanban, and kind of we support both. In terms of what my team does, we sort of do a mix. But in terms of how we break issues down, we usually start with the epic, which is like will contain lots of different issues or tasks that need to be done, or vertical feature slices. That's sort of like how I like to coach my team to break things up. So it's something that requires both front end and back end, and sort of even some design to complete one little thing that an user can do with your feature, whatever it is you're building. Then that gets weighted on a scale. Usually the Fibonacci sequence is what we use to weight. So it'll be 0, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, or 13. And if something is bigger than 5, we usually suggest that breaking it down or splitting it apart into smaller things that can be shipped independently, or smaller vertical feature slices. And so that sort of happens in a kind of a continuous process. We have like a planning breakdown lane on our board. And then whenever something drops there, we usually get the engineers involved and we have a conversation on the issue about how to tackle it, or on the epic. And then we kind of split things up that way. So I suggest doing 1-week iterations if you're just starting, because you get more feedback. Some teams can't do that. It's like just too much. And so 2-week would be fine. But the sort of the purpose of using iterations is to have feedback loops, make sure that like, if you do have bottlenecks or problems, you're mitigating that risk instead of letting it go on for an additional week. And then once the team is sort of fluent in being able to do that, and it's sort of frictionless, then you can think about extending out to 2 weeks is what I would recommend. But I had the most success, especially when starting with new teams, to do week-long iterations or sprints, and kind of cut down on a little bit of fluff, and you get your planning done and your retrospective and everything in like an hour and a half, once a week, which wasn't too bad.
Okay, great. Thank you for the feedback. Appreciate it.
Alexander, do you want to vocalize your question?
Hi, yes, can you hear me okay?
We can hear you.
Okay, one quick question. We're just starting using GitLab, and my biggest fear as a project manager is the fact that we'll be using labels, and I really do not want to have clutter regarding this. Do you have any advice on, I don't know, how to get around this, or any other things regarding this?
We are working on making some better kind of first-class fields on issues and epics, like status for one, and then type. So we'll have issue type soon in the product. And I think with that, you can safely manage most things. In terms of clutter, like on boards, you can disable, like you basically turn off the labels on the issue card, so you don't have to see them if you don't want. I do think that they sort of play an important role in kind of collecting some metadata around the issue itself, and in a flexible way that could be mapped to a business. Do you have any specifics that you, or like specific ideas or things that you would like to avoid in terms of clutter, or examples that you can provide that I could maybe speak to?
Yeah, for example, we have a lot of teams, and every team has its own part of the product, and they're basically free to use whatever labels they want. So in this sense, this is my biggest fear, that everyone will go wild and have a label for every little thing.
It's a legitimate fear. I think this is, you can let everyone have their own labels. Sort of what we do at GitLab is we set all of our labels at the highest group level. So GitLab.org, for example, and then all the projects below them inherit those labels from their parent group. So we manage all the labels in one place. Sure, you can create all your labels downstream and wherever you want, but you're less likely to do that if you have a central place where those labels are managed in a higher level parent group. And that also is a nice thing if you want to restrict access to that parent group, then only those people who have access can manage those labels. In that way, you can have some consistency coming down from the top. Sure, subgroups and projects might be able to create their own labels and do whatever, but from a reporting standpoint, like it's not going to impact you too much. I think that's also where we have a handbook, and like when we make changes like this, like we open a merge request and have a conversation about it, and so everyone on the team sort of understands things. But it is interesting to balance like the allowing teams to be autonomous and pick their own processes, with also trying to make sure you have some consistency from a organizational standpoint. So it's a challenge, but there are some ways to work around it, I guess.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful.
Thank you. Oops, wrong one. Paolo, would you like to verbalize your question?
Hi, Carlos and Gabe. Sorry for the interference. But I want to know about how do I bind the issues with the merge request? Is this automatic? The flow, merge request flow, how do I configure?
So you don't need to do any configuration out of the gate. You have your issues that live in the project, and your merge request, your repository is also in a project. And simply, like if you open a merge or open an issue, there's a button on there to create a merge request. And so what that will do is when you click that button, it will automatically spin up a branch for you. It will automatically create the merge requests, and it will automatically associate the merge request to the issue. And so that way it will show up in the issue view, and then it will set the merge request to basically automatically close the issue when it gets merged. You can turn that off if you don't want it. If you're working on a merge request in one project that needs to reference an issue in another, all you have to do is in the merge request description, just type references : and then a link to the issue, and it will automatically create that relationship for you. So there's not a ton of configuration that you need to do out of the gate.
Thank you very much. I'm new to GitLab, and I'm trying to onboard to create it. So my beginner questions. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. It was a great question.
Any other questions, either through the chat or if you want to vocalize? Elena, let's go ahead and pick you. Elena, please vocalize your question.
Sorry, can you hear me?
We can.
I have one question regarding the different iterations and milestones. We choose, because we're at the beginning with GitLab, we choose to use milestones for sprints, just from the reason that it gives you more details regarding the Burndown Charts, and you have that section with merge requests, which issues are open, are assigned or closed. It gives you more details at that level. In each way, it will impact as on the long term using milestones instead of using iterations.
Yep, that's a great question. We're eventually going to be kind of having parity between the iteration report view and the milestone report view. Long term, there are differences. Milestones, the way that they're designed, they can have start dates. They don't have to. They can have, you can have multiple milestones going at the same time. So it makes things like capturing an accurate velocity and wanting to measure that and surface it in the product really difficult, which is why we sort of introduce iterations as kind of an alternative time box to complement milestones. And so what we're moving forward with iterations is that's what we'll actually be building the mechanisms to measure velocity integrate that into boards so that you can see when you're like planning an iteration, you can see how much weight you can probably get done in a given iteration based on your historical velocity. And you'll start to see that there's going to be some additional features built into iterations, like being able to automatically set up an iteration cadence, for example, so that you basically GitLab will create your recurring iterations for you automatically, automatically rolling issues from one iteration into the next. So there's going to be more and more features that we're going to be adding into iterations to kind of act more like that kind of team planning time box. So I think you'd be fine for now to use milestones, but eventually you're going to want to move to iterations, where I would recommend it.
Yeah, thank you. But what I've noticed that on Milestone, you can use the roadmap and you can see on a Gantt chart how they are displayed, and you can, I don't know, see your epics on a long period, how they overlap with your sprints. I think that's why we picked to use milestone instead of iteration, because for iteration we didn't have these options. It's really important for us to see for a big epic, for example, to see on how many sprints we can use to fulfill that epic, to launch it, to release it.
Yeah, that's great feedback. And we need to support iterations kind of rolling up into epics as well. And most of our customers, the way that they use the two in conjunction is they'll use, like, if they're doing quarterly planning or PI planning or something that's like a couple months long, that time period, they'll use the milestone to represent that. And then they use the iterations as a smaller planning period. But I do think that we do need to have parity in terms of how that the dates roll up into epics and then onto roadmaps. So you could use either or. But in that case, you can just sort of use, like if you have a release that you want to make, 6 weeks from now, you can use a milestone for that. And then you can also assign that same issue to an iteration for the smaller sprint planning. But great feedback. And I think you'll start to see more parity between those two in terms of how they impact rollups and Gantt and roadmaps and stuff like that.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Elena. I think we have time for one more question. If there's no further questions, we can go ahead and conclude. Thanks for your time, everyone.